My brother sold our dead parents' house without telling me, pocketed all the money, and is now claiming I'm ungrateful when I confronted him about the inheritance. I honestly can't believe I'm even writing this, but I feel like I'm stuck in a nightmare I can't wake up from. A part of me still hopes this is some cruel misunderstanding, but I know better. For context, I'm 33F, and my older brother, Matt, 38M, has always been someone I admired growing up, despite our differences. We weren't the closest siblings, he was the outgoing, golden boy type, while I was quieter and more introspective, but I never imagined that he would betray me in the way he has. This all started after the worst year of our lives. Our parents passed away within months of each other, and to say it was devastating would be an understatement. My mom had been battling cancer for years, and even though we knew her time was limited, her death still hit like a freight train. She was the glue that held our family together, the one who never forgot a birthday or missed a moment to remind us how much we meant to her. Watching her slip away broke something in all of us, but my dad. He didn't last long after her. He passed away from a heart attack just 3 months later. I think losing her was too much for him. After their deaths, there was so much to handle. The funeral arrangements, sorting through their belongings, and figuring out what to do with the house, all of it felt overwhelming. I stepped up to help because I lived closer and didn't have the same family obligations as Matt, who has a wife and 2 kids. At first, I didn't mind. It felt like a way to stay connected to my parents, even though it was exhausting. Matt, on the other hand, seemed detached from everything. He'd show up for the big moments, like the memorial service, but when it came to the day-to-day tasks of cleaning out their belongings or dealing with legal paperwork, he was always too busy. At the time, I didn't push him. I figured he was grieving in his own way, and I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, everyone processes loss differently, right? When it came to the house, we initially agreed to keep it. It wasn't just a building, it was the home we grew up in, filled with memories of Christmas mornings, backyard barbecues, and late-night talks with Mom and Dad. We talked about possibly renting it out or even just holding onto it for a while until we decided what to do long-term. I offered to take care of the upkeep since I lived nearby, and Matt seemed relieved not to have to deal with it. At the time, I thought I was being helpful, but now I realize I was just giving him an easy out. For a year, I took care of the house like it was my own. I'd stop by every few weeks to check on things, mow the lawn, and make sure everything was in order. Sometimes, I'd sit in the living room and let myself feel close to my parents again. It was comforting, in a bittersweet way. Matt, on the other hand, never asked about the house. He never offered to help with maintenance, never visited, and barely even mentioned it. I thought he just wasn't as sentimental about it as I was. Then, about 6 months ago, everything changed. I went to check on the house as usual, but when I pulled into the driveway, I froze. There was a for sale sign planted right in the front yard. At first, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe a neighbor had put it there by accident? But when I called the realtor listed on the sign, they confirmed that the house had already been sold, weeks ago. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I immediately called Matt, shaking with anger and confusion. When he finally picked up, he acted like it was no big deal. He said, "Oh yeah, I sold the house. I thought I mentioned it to you." Mentioned it? He hadn't said a single word to me about selling the house. When I demanded to know what he was talking about, he had the nerve to sound annoyed, like I was overreacting. He explained that he'd handled everything himself, listing the house, negotiating with buyers, signing the paperwork, and that the sale had been finalized weeks ago. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him how he could possibly think it was okay to sell our parents' house without even consulting me, and his response was, "I didn't think you'd care. You've got your own place, and it's not like you could afford to keep it long-term anyway." I was speechless. Not only had he made this massive decision without me, but he'd also pocketed every single cent from the sale. When I pressed him on where the money went, he admitted he'd already used most of it, to pay off his mortgage, buy a new car, and put some away for his kids' college funds. He didn't offer me a dime. At that moment, something in me snapped. I told him he had no right to make that decision on his own and that the house wasn't just his to sell. He tried to brush me off, saying he took care of it because someone had to and that he didn't think I'd be capable of handling it. He said I should be grateful he dealt with the stress of the sale so I didn't have to. I spent weeks after that trying to figure out how he'd even pulled this off. I spoke to a lawyer, hoping there was some way to contest the sale, but Matt had covered his tracks well. Shortly after my dad's funeral, he'd handed me a stack of paperwork to sign, claiming it was for routine estate stuff. I'd been so emotionally drained at the time that I didn't even read the fine print. It turns out, one of those documents gave him full authority to manage the estate however he saw fit. I'd unknowingly signed away my rights. When I confronted him again, he had the audacity to call me ungrateful. He said I was being selfish and that he needed the money more than I did because he had a family to support. He told me I should get over it because it's just money, and I didn't need it since I'm single and don't have kids. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the complete lack of respect, the betrayal, and the way he dismissed me like I didn't matter. Our relationship has completely disintegrated since then. Matt keeps trying to act like nothing happened, sending me texts about random family updates or inviting me to holiday gatherings, but I can't even look at him without feeling a wave of anger and hurt. He's even enlisted our extended family to try and pressure me into forgiving him. Most of them are taking a neutral stance, saying family is family and that we need to move past this. A few have outright sided with him, saying he was just trying to do what's best. No one seems to want to hold him accountable, and it's infuriating. The worst part is, I feel like I'm grieving all over again. Losing the house feels like losing another piece of my parents, and the betrayal from Matt cuts so deeply that I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him again. I used to look up to him as my big brother, someone who'd always have my back. Now, I don't even recognize him. I've considered taking legal action, even if it's just to prove a point, but the emotional toll feels too high. For now, I've decided to cut him out of my life completely. If he ever wants to make amends, he'll need to take full responsibility for what he did, but I'm not holding my breath. This whole ordeal has left me questioning everything. How do you move forward after such a deep betrayal? How do you reconcile the person you thought someone was with the reality of who they've become? I don't have the answers yet, but I know one thing for sure, I deserve better than this. It's been a while since I shared what happened, and I wanted to provide an update. I've spent a lot of time processing everything and trying to figure out how to move forward. To say it's been a roller coaster would be an understatement. When I wrote about this initially, I was still deep in the shock and anger of it all. Now, after some time, therapy, and a lot of reflection, I feel like I can look at the situation with more clarity, though it hasn't been easy. After cutting Matt out of my life, I focused on myself and my healing. I won't lie, there were days when I felt like I was drowning. Losing the house wasn't just losing a physical place, it felt like losing the last tangible connection to my parents. Every time I thought about the betrayal, it brought back memories of sitting at the kitchen table with my mom or helping my dad in the garden. Those memories felt tainted now, like they'd been stolen from me along with the house. Therapy helped me unpack a lot of that grief, and I've started to rebuild those memories in my heart, separate from the house itself. I realized that no one, not even Matt, can take away the love my parents gave me or the experiences we shared. One of the hardest things was dealing with extended family. A few of them outright told me to let it go and be the bigger person. Some said that Matt was only doing what he thought was right, as if that somehow excused his actions. It was deeply hurtful to feel like no one was fully in my corner. I realized pretty quickly that some people just don't want to deal with conflict in the family, no matter how justified the anger or betrayal. At first, I tried to explain myself, to get them to understand how much Matt's actions hurt me, but I eventually realized it wasn't worth it. People who truly cared about me wouldn't dismiss my pain like that. So, I started pulling back from those relationships too. Surprisingly, a few family members did reach out to show support after hearing the full story. My aunt on my dad's side was furious when she found out what Matt had done. She told me she couldn't believe how he had the audacity to sell the house without even consulting me and that my parents would be heartbroken if they knew how he handled things. Hearing that from her was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that my feelings weren't overblown, but it also made me mourn my parents all over again, knowing they'd probably be as devastated by Matt's actions as I was. As for Matt, he's continued trying to reach out, though I've ignored almost every attempt. He's sent long-winded texts about how I'm being unreasonable and how family should stick together. He even tried sending me pictures of his kids, saying things like, "Your nephews miss you." It's manipulative, plain and simple. He wants to sweep everything under the rug without taking accountability, and I refuse to let him. He's also tried to get his wife to mediate, but that didn't go anywhere either. She called me one evening, starting with the usual pleasantries, and then launched into a spiel about how Matt really thought he was doing what was best and how he didn't mean to hurt me. I cut her off mid-sentence and told her that unless Matt was ready to take full responsibility for his actions, I wasn't interested in having this conversation. She hung up pretty quickly after that, and I haven't heard from her since. I did eventually decide to take legal action, not necessarily to recover the money, though that would have been nice, but to make a statement. I wanted to make it clear that what he did was not okay. I spoke to another lawyer, who was compassionate and understanding, but the reality was bleak. Because of the paperwork I'd signed and the way Matt had structured the sale, there wasn't much I could do to challenge it. It felt like another slap in the face. I beat myself up for a while, thinking about how I should have read the documents more carefully, but my therapist helped me understand that I was in no position to handle complex legal matters while grieving both of my parents. Matt took advantage of me in my most vulnerable moment, and that's on him, not me. While the legal route didn't pan out, pursuing it still felt cathartic. It was a way of standing up for myself, even if the outcome wasn't what I wanted. And it solidified my decision to keep Matt out of my life. I blocked his number and removed him from all my social media. I also stopped attending any family gatherings where I knew he'd be present. It's been hard, but the peace I feel from not having to deal with his toxic presence is worth it. There's one thing I've learned from all of this: boundaries are everything. Growing up, I was the peacemaker in the family. I always tried to smooth things over and keep the peace, even when it came at my own expense. But this experience taught me that peace isn't worth sacrificing your self-respect. Matt crossed a line, and there's no going back from that. I've accepted that we may never reconcile, and I'm okay with that. I'd rather have no relationship with him than a relationship built on manipulation and betrayal. In the meantime, I've been working on honoring my parents' memory in other ways. I created a scrapbook with old photos and mementos from the house. I even planted a small garden in my backyard, inspired by my dad's love of gardening. Every time I sit outside, surrounded by flowers and greenery, I feel a little closer to them. It's not the same as having the house, but it's mine, and it feels right. Life is slowly moving forward. I've started focusing more on my career and hobbies, and I've even reconnected with a few old friends I'd lost touch with during the chaos of the past few years. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm building a future that's entirely my own. There's still a part of me that mourns what was lost: the house, my relationship with Matt, and the sense of unity in our family, but I'm learning to carry those losses with me instead of letting them define me. To anyone reading this who's dealing with betrayal or family conflict, my advice is this: prioritize your own well-being. Set boundaries, even if it feels uncomfortable or selfish. People who truly love and respect you will understand, and those who don't? They were never in your corner to begin with. As for Matt, if he ever decides to genuinely apologize and make amends, I'll be open to hearing him out. But I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm choosing to protect my peace, and that's more than enough for me.